Welcome back, everybody. This is the second of our sneak peek preview episodes. And in this episode, we're asking a question about why does election integrity matter? And we're building on our previous conversation, which was all about voting. We asked, does voting make you a good citizen? And based on our answers, well, you might even have a question of why we're even talking about election integrity at all. So maybe this is our jumping off point. So for those of you who don't remember, I'm Joia. I'm here with my co-founder of 1776 Forward, Chris. And Chris, why don't you just recap and tell people what we talked about? About voting, why voting matters, and well, first, does voting actually make you a good citizen? And then let's connect this to why voting perhaps does or does not matter.
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who have heard our first part of our two-part preview of the philosophical liberal, and we're excited again to be with you. In that one, as Joy mentioned, we did cover the question of does voting make you a good citizen? Both Joy and I, slightly different perspectives or angles, came at it. The answer to essentially it's something, but not a lot. So in that context, and we obviously talked through what that meant, that it's not really a distinguishing uh, aspect of civic engagement, and there's just so a whole host of other ways to get involved, that frankly it begs a whole bunch of other deeper questions, first principles questions that we're going to dive into in this entire philosophical liberal series. So we're putting the ultimate pin in all of those questions for the series to come in January, so stay tuned. But I guess even where we left it on that surface level answer of it's something but not a lot, yeah, then you might be asking, well, then why would I care about the process of voting, i.e., election integrity, or even what does election integrity mean? So, I mean, I guess I can start in that sense of, I think number one, voting is still the system we use to elect our representatives, to express our sovereign will as a free people in our society. And so, however imperfect or relatively unimportant it is, we want to make sure that it's a good system and actually reflects that will, that popular will. So that's one reason why it matters that we have good voting systems that are honest and transparent, and clean. And then just integrity as a value. We're going to talk a value and a virtue. We're going to talk a lot about that in the series. And for those of you who have read our statement, you'll see that that is one of our top virtues for free citizens in a free society that we've called out and highlighted. So, just as a means of connecting your thought with your action, making sure that if it's a free society and an honest society that we want, well, then our voting systems, the method by which we seek to implement and structure that society, should also be conducted with the same degree of integrity that we're asking of ourselves in our day-to-day lives.
I'll jump in and add that in our previous video, we talked about how our method here is a combination of first principles thinking and an action bias and real action orientation. Both Chris and I are entrepreneurs, and I think we bring that perspective to this issue and this discussion for elections specifically and politics and political culture more broadly. And I'll say, just to emphasize, that if we're going to have an action orientation, we have to start where we are. So we have to think deeply in a first principles way about the fundamental issues, but we have to start taking action where we are. And this is where we are, is also when we are. It is right before the 2024 elections, which, if nothing else, are promising to last more than just November 5th. So this will probably be
Most
timely even
likely.
for a few weeks into the future, and we will see what happens there. But let's point out then that we ultimately want our to reflect our deepest thinking. So let's go there. Let's start this first principles conversation about election integrity, talking about just what are elections and what does integrity mean in this context of elections.
Sure. Do you want to take that one first, or you want me to? Which of those questions would you like to start with?
Sure. Well, I'll start with integrity because I really took the lead even in our discussion of the virtues to think about what integrity means in the personal context. And as Chris said, if you read our statement, you'll see we have a 10 plus bonus one virtues, one of which is integrity. And there we were thinking about integrity in the personal sense, about connecting your ideas to your actions and having that harmony that exists. But election integrity here, I think integrity is even evoking these ideas of soundness and wholeness and honesty that we want to matter when it comes to our political system. Would you like to add anything to that, Chris?
Well, I guess for those who haven't read our statement, I'll just read kind of the full definition, and certainly to take the first principles approach that we gave on integrity. We said it's taking ideas and ideals seriously by practicing consistency in thought and action, striving toward coherency and integration through continued growth, and being committed to one's vision and values in both word and deed. So I think throughout there a couple times, even within our own definition of this virtue and value of integrity, is this notion of thought and action. So I agree with you entirely that a big component of kind of election integrity is the elections are the way we kind of act, or one of the ways in which we act to enact our vision of civic society and free government. And so, it's just integrity is a virtue that I think we want to practice in all human endeavors, no less so in those that govern our, government affairs. So that's, I guess, what I would add on the integrity front. And then I guess, there's a kind of, I think you raised the second question of what are even elections for in a free society. And I think there's something there too of the importance of elections, just that they are however many problems they may have, and however, and we're going to get into this topic as well, and we cover kind of the proper structure of government. But even if we find our current system has many areas for improvement, it is still the system we use, and in many ways, it's a means to settle our scores peacefully. And so that only works if the system is trustworthy and honest, and everybody who's participating in it believes in it, and trusts it. So that is really the core of what election integrity means. And for those who are somewhat new to even this realm, a lot of the language surrounding this is about making sure that our elections are free and fair, and secure and clean. You'll hear all of these terms, and we can talk through what that means or give examples what that might look like. But our electoral system is the way in which we enact our will. And so, I guess they're still an important part of the civic process. And so, as with any other endeavor, I would just reiterate that, I think we want to have it practice integrity consistently in all areas of life.
I think that's beautifully said. So, what aspect of this should we turn to next?
Um, well, I guess, we've talked a lot about kind of the notion of election integrity. It might be helpful to just even kind of give a little bit of history or background on the issue, I guess, and kind of the relevance of it. I mean, certainly, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 4 or 8 years in America, or even anywhere globally for that matter,
Or
how
even going farther back in time, frankly, which
yes,
we're going to get
correct.
to.
but at least I guess I'm talking in terms of our modern social media and kind of mass media age that we're now living in. You are well aware of how contested U.S. elections have become, particularly at the presidential level, and in particular, the last two, or the last few, have featured some of the starkest and largest, calls and controversies about whether the final outcome was in fact the correct, fair, free, actual results of the people. So I think this is a topic of rising interest. It, unfortunately, like so much in our modern era, has taken on very partisan tones in many ways. I think, again, here, what we're focused on here at the Philosophical Liberal in 1776 forward is kind of the universal principles and the unifying themes that we can unite us across your partisan backgrounds, regardless of which party you come on. And so this issue, in my view, is important regardless of which party you're on, and regardless of how deep your history or your knowledge of the history of American elections is, because when you actually look into the history, what you find is there is a long and sordid, I guess you could say, history of contested elections, of um, not just accusations, but very credible evidence of uh, fraudulent behavior, voter suppression, and the like, by both parties, all participants in it. So this is a problem that American elections have faced from the beginning, and if anything, it's just becoming, well, one, there's more attention around it, especially in our modern mass media age. So I think more people are growing aware to it, but also I would argue that as we've kind of drifted further away from a liberal ideal in our government and society, it just is encouraging unscrupulous actors on all sides to take advantage of a system that has many loopholes, even by design, you might argue, because it's designed by the very actors who benefit from an opaque and system that does not have full integrity. Um, and yeah, I mean, going back to even the presidential election of 1800, that was one of the first contested elections, and there have been at least, I'm looking, want to make sure I kind of get my history right. There have been at least one, two, three, four, five, six or seven of our however many presidential elections we've now had, that have been contested, congressional elections at all levels. The Heritage Foundation, which is a right-leaning think tank, has done, not even a comprehensive, but a sample database of election fraud and voter suppression issues. Brookings Institute from kind of the left wing has looked into this as well. So I guess the point is, when you really look into that, it's a bipartisan problem, and also therefore hopefully people come to see that it's a bipartisan issue that we should all have a desire in wanting to solve. We'll post some of the links in our write-up on this piece for those who want to learn more about the specific details. I don't want to pick a one singular case, and kind of single that out, but I think the picture we want to paint is that there's a long history in this area um, of people taking advantage of the system and kind of, I guess you could say, following the human nature and proclivity to uh, kind of, I'll set up for your intro here, Joy, on this topic. I know you've had some of these thoughts, but the predator prey mentality of uh, not kind of, I guess, using elections more well, yeah, I guess for lack of a better term, kind of in a settling not in a peaceful way.
Thank you for the setup, and this is definitely a point I wanted to make on the issue, because if there has been bipartisan bad actors throughout the history of our country, and probably throughout the histories of other countries that have employed elections and democratic processes, there's definitely a way in which it ought to be a bipartisan issue when we all can agree on that election integrity should matter. That if we're going to be playing this particular kind of game, that we should be playing a game where we all can respect the rules of the game. And one of the points I like to make on this, a lot of people now comment that our elections have become something like sports with elephant versus team donkey. And on this issue, I like to make the point that I think we should be even more like sports than we already are. When you look at the history of what sports are and what they've done for humanity. As you pointed out, one of the ways that I like to frame this, we already even get into it in our statement on philosophical liberalism, is making a distinction between what we call the creator-trader versus the predator-prey version of an approach toward human relations. And I think it's always important to note that it is part of our nature to be predator prey. It is how human beings and, in fact, living organisms, all mammals, survive by preying off of either other animals or plants or other living organisms. It's how we survive. And throughout humanity, most humans have this idea of using other human beings in predatory ways if they can. But you can make an argument that what civilization perhaps does is help us rise above that predator prey nature. There's a very interesting fact about humanity that when we don't act as predators and prey, but instead work as creators who try to build and collaborate and trade and exchange to mutual advantage, creating win-win situations, that in fact this has been the rise of humanity, the rise of technology, the rise of freedom, the rise of living standards for all human beings have come when we have, you could say, suppressed or contained our predator-prey nature, or at least wrapped it within a creator-trader vision, taking that zero-sum approach and wrapping it into the positive sum win-win approach. And sports is a beautiful example of this. So sports perhaps takes some of that predator prey nature that has led to wars throughout all of human history. Perfect example of how human beings try to predate on others and treat other human beings as prey, takes those aggressive instincts that we have and then contains it within the form of a game. And specifically, it's a game where the game works best when all the players respect the game as a whole. So we were just talking. So the World Series just ended here. Unfortunately, our Yankees just embarrassed themselves, as far as
Mhm.
I am concerned, as a proud New Yorker. But I hear about even the fun of even having our teams and our rivalries comes from being able to respect the game as a whole. And the game wouldn't even function well if there wasn't respect for the game as a whole. And I think this is even what we want ultimately for our elections. It is what, as you were pointing out, Chris, what helps guarantee that peaceful transition of power is when everybody will believe that we have a system that is fair, so that the loser has that opportunity to lose graciously. And that ultimately, what we all should be doing is respecting the Constitution, respecting the country as a whole, and then just playing this game for the small things that we perhaps are debating and disagreeing over. But I'll turn it over to you if you want to add your 2 cents on this, and then maybe even share some more about the history as well. Maybe some interesting tidbits that might interest people from this bipartisan perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things, I like how you said that, like any game, you need for the game to work, you need both sides to buy into it and to agree on the rules. And I think, um, I mean, I could go in so many different trains of thought on this one, but one of perhaps the reasons why this issue has become more contentious, and certainly, our most recent presidential election, the 2021, was riven with um, lots of accusations and ample evidence as well of, at minimum, changes mid-game to the game by lots of states and municipalities. Um, the ostensible reason was because of the COVID pandemic and protecting people from that. But there were certainly lawsuits, some of which were successfully adjudicated through the judicial system, showing that those rules were changed unconstitutionally or extra legally. And that I think, and again, the history of American elections will show you that that is not a new phenomenon, that whenever there are emergencies or crises or even just political majorities that are strong enough to change the rules of the game, especially to advantage one side over another, that fuels this kind of predator prey mentality that then actually, I think, makes people less trusting in the system because it just becomes a vehicle for one side or another, and both sides have done it whenever they can. This very much is kind of an equal opportunity, uh, you know, perpetrator, if you will, in the American system. So, it just, I think that just fuels the sense among many voters and citizens that at minimum they don't know what the rules of the game are, but it's certainly opaque. And I guess I would add to that um, in our present age, when technology is allowing us to communicate like so across far distances, real time, and you can have encrypted messages and all kinds of various forms of protection, instantaneous checking of things. There's definitely no reason why our elections shouldn't be fully clear and auditable by the people to verify the accuracy of the results and the eligibility of everybody who is voting. These are things that ideally we should all agree on. And in fact, when you poll Americans on, just a simple question for an example of should voters have to verify their identification before voting, I mean, you get 80 to 90% in some recent polls of Americans saying, yes, affirmatively, we should be doing that. But for some reason, our political system is incapable of implementing even those basic checks and balances. So, personally, someone like me, I look at something like that, and that's a big red flag to me of, oh, okay, well, then there must be a reason why vested interests want to maintain this system. So, these are, and then that just fuels, that's the environment in which either well-intentioned or just not so well-intentioned actors can then fan the flames of trust about the system. In particular, if they are being a sore loser about an election they recently lost, or if there are genuine complaints, about how an election was conducted. So, I guess just it's a little bit stream of consciousness here, but I guess the point is just that um, we have a system that is it's created by the very parties, capital P and also lowercase p parties that benefit from the opacity and kind of the uncertainty in the system. And that should be what we should be focused on. It should unite us of wanting to kind of reform and fix so that we actually can take the temperature down on our elections and build trust in the system rather than, tearing it down, frankly. And so I guess I'm just troubled by, the fact that this issue, even the topic of election integrity, that phrase in the culture right now, I think has unfortunately been kind of partisanized. I don't know what the right word is, but made into a partisan issue because, at least coming out of the most recent election, one side, the Republican side, made more of the claims about problems with the voting system. But we know as recently as the 2016 and the 2000 elections, it was the Democrat side that had those same complaints. So, um, I guess this would just be my plea to everybody out there listening to not have short memories and remember that even if you're on the winning end of this bargain right now, there have been many other times where it didn't work out that way. And I think that should be a reminder and a call to action for all of us that this is an issue that we all benefit from improving and ensuring does operate with integrity.
Exactly, Chris. And this is something you started pointing out, and you and I have had this conversation before that, as you pointed out, that this is not an issue of technology because we absolutely have the technology with all of the improvements we've made in just the past 20 years, as you pointed out, to have encryption, blockchain, to have information and data collection, gathering, analysis. There's no reason why we couldn't have and shouldn't have elections that are fully auditable by any citizen, by any party. And yet we don't. And I think that what it points out is that this isn't an issue of technology, but it is an issue essentially of morality. It's an issue of the people, all of us as individual citizens, choosing to stand up and say, this matters. If if this is our system, if this is how we are going to choose to govern, then we ought to have a system that has integrity, that is a fair system where the rules are laid out in advance and everybody agrees upon them, and that it's up to us as citizens to make our voices heard on this issue. And Chris, you've been particularly inspiring in this particular election, taking action. So I would love to even hear, maybe you can share, a story or two about what you've seen in the action that you've taken. You and I, we talk a lot about big ideas, but we also want to show that we practice what we preach. So maybe you can share a little bit of your story of what you've observed about election integrity for this election cycle.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I guess I can say, um, even my own political evolution on voting in elections, has kind of traveled its own path. It wasn't always even an area that I was super focused on. I mean, as my answer in the prior episode indicates, I've always had kind of um, kind of a realistic view of the importance, the relative importance of voting. But certainly, I was very troubled by the changing of the rules en masse midway through the game in 2020, and then all of the evidence that emerged in the aftermath of that, of just how bad and how weak the protections for clean, free, transparent elections are in our states. And I guess one just kind of factual point of note for listeners out there is, under the U.S. Constitution, at least in our country, elections are held at the state level. So whenever even there's a federal election for president, for example, that's really 50 states holding 50 elections. And then further, most states have constructed their election systems where a lot of the powers are delegated down to the county levels within their state. So and there's over 3,000 counties in the US. So you really have 50 broad-based sets of rules and games, if you will, and then potentially 3,000 iterations and variations on that. So that is a problem on some level towards at least creating unified or consistent rules. But it also just makes it, there's just innumerable ways in which things can go wrong in terms of how you structure and try and achieve election integrity. So that was just something that I frankly didn't even fully appreciate until watching an election that seemed to be being conducted in so many different ways in so many different states. So in the aftermath of that, I kind of got more interested in this issue over the last 4 years. And so I figured the best thing I could do for my own knowledge and education was to just go see it myself in real time. And so one of the things you can do is volunteer to be a poll watcher, and go observe the conduct of elections. I believe every state, to one degree or another, allows observers to go observe the conduct of elections, whether as a member of the public or on behalf of a political party. You can usually do both. Look it up. In your state's election code, it will provide for how that actually plays out. But that's something I volunteered to do for 2 elections in this cycle. And it's usually done at the county local level. And so that has just been a fascinating education for me of seeing how my own state and county's election system is run. I happen to live in Florida right now, which has, infamously was the center of one of the most contested elections 24 years ago, the 2000 election and the famous Hanging Chad debacle. Um, Florida has tightened successively its rules over the years. So again, at least ranked by certain, kind of specialists who track this field, um, it is considered to be one of the gold standards in state election systems. But from my experience being a poll observer this cycle, I can tell you that I definitely have identified and seen loopholes even within a relatively well-run state's system here, whereby, for example, I have witnessed clear instances of uh, strong voter suggestion, if not voter buying of votes, and or certainly, uh, kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, kind of voter mules, assisters who go and get paid to basically bring in voters by the head, things like that. So, there's just a lot of things going on that, you can a reasonable observer would look at and say, okay, maybe that's something that could be tightened. But, more importantly, it's just shown me that there's just a lot of room for improvement in our system, but it's also, just given me, you know, an outlet to get involved and to kind of be eyes and ears, be part of that transparent system and be eyes and ears rather than leaving it up to, an elected official or somebody who is a specialist in the field. I mean, it really is citizen engagement that allows you to provide that transparency. So it's been a great process, and that's definitely one way in which, if you're interested in this area, is a very real, tangible way you can get involved and like I said, provide a check and balance, if you will, on the system. We can certainly talk about a whole bunch of other ways you can get involved in this area, but I mean, I guess to your question about what I've been up to lately, that was kind of one of the ways that I've gotten involved.
Why don't we suggest perhaps some of the other ways that people can get involved? This is another conversation that you and I have definitely had many times to point out that it seems that if the majority of Americans could agree on one thing, it's that we all hate the candidates that we've been given recently. And that I think might be a bipartisan sentiment across the
Hmm.
country. But as
Definitely.
you and I have noted that, the elections are really just the tip of the iceberg of politics and political culture. And that if we're really going to have change at the tip of the iceberg, that we really have to act throughout all the levels of the iceberg itself. And I think this is something that you and I are just going to continue to explore more as we get into the series that we're starting in January. So this is perhaps just another tease for that series where we will do more of the deep dive first principles thinking and also come up with different suggestions for ways that each of us could try to get involved at all sorts of levels of political culture.
Yeah, I mean, I would just elaborate on that and just by saying, I mean, this kind of even is a further um, this point that that you're making, I would argue is a kind of further rationale for our answer to the first question in the first episode about why voting is not super significant, at least in my view, is because, if you think about it, you know, who the candidates are, like unless participating throughout the process in primary elections or even in candidate vetting and things like that, like, you basically are handed two options every 2 or 4 years, and then you choose between often the lesser of two evils, as many people like to say. But um, there are a lot of steps that precede that, and that's really even just party politics, which if you're not a super partisan, or political person, that may not even interest you as much. There's, um, the laws that our representatives are passing in our name and the policies that affect us and getting involved, at each of those levels. I mean, if all you're doing is voting for those representatives, then and then never checking in on them in the intervening 2 or 4 years, then there's all of that activity that you're missing out on as well. And then I think Joy and I are going to make in this series, we're going to make the case, and we even hint at it in our statement on the website, but we're going to make the case that civic engagement is even a more expansive endeavor than merely kind of governance, I guess political governance. So we'll talk about our views on what else is encompassed in civic engagement, but certainly when we talk about a cultural revolution as much as a political revolution for philosophical liberalism, it starts with things like the morality and the character development and the creative work that you're doing and bringing philosophically liberal principles to each of those areas as well to change the culture around you as much as it may be lobbying a representative or voting for a representative to enact specific policy changes. So I guess it's just a long-winded way of saying voting is really kind of the final and last small step in a much bigger uh, pie, if you will, of civic activity, all of which points along the process or slices of the pie you can be involved in.
I love it. It's the very top level of Parmesan cheese of a very deep lasagna, is my favorite
Yeah, Joy
metaphor.
likes the lasagna analogy. I'll go with the pie one, but needless to say, it's late in the evening, so we must both be hungry.
Think so.
I see you. I've got the sweet tooth, and you've got more of the savory tooth.
At least for now. Any other
Exactly.
final points before we wrap up this conversation?
No, just I mean, I guess I would also just echo your point that we are in talking about more ways you can be civically engaged. We just want to continually hammer this point that um, there's so much we can that any of us can do to take action and put these ideas into action, and that's going to be a key theme of our method and hopefully even our value add in this series is providing some suggestions on that. And certainly we'd love the feedback of all of our leaders and community members to, if you would like more specific ideas from us as we go along, we'll give as much level of specificity as we can. And, we'll note when we, maybe specialists in an area or have practiced it and where we're really just pontificating and kind of giving our off the cuff opinions about how we would approach the issue or things we would do and to take action. So we'll get into all of that, but really looking forward to offering some valuable suggestions on that front.
Precisely. Chris, I know you know how much it irks me the way that followers is the term that is used throughout
I
social
didn't use
media.
it. Yeah, hopefully you caught
You
that.
didn't, but at
Oh,
least
did
let
I?
people know that my preferred term and the way that and as we're pointing out that politics is just the tip of the iceberg, the top of the pie, the Parmesan cheese of the lasagna of the big question of what is the proper and best way to organize society for all of the individuals involved. Those are the big deep questions we're going to ask, and then think about the actions to take to bring it about and make it real. But I'll suggest as a kind of preview to what we're going to share that as opposed to thinking about followers, I think the real way to think about how we build community is one of leaders among leaders. And so we're reaching out to all of you as fellow leaders, and we are looking forward to seeing the ways that you will take charge and lead in your own actions.
I love that. Well said. And on that note, we'll bring this one to a close. This completes our two-part preview. Hopefully, you've gotten a little taste here of what our series is going to be about. We tried to make the specific questions of these two episodes timely and relevant to pending elections. So maybe it even gives all of you out there listening or watching a little bit of food for thought as the election approaches. Just know that no matter what happens, there's plenty more to come thereafter every day. is a new day of civic engagement to build a more liberal society. And we're going to be here taking you on our own journey and hopefully inviting you to join us in thinking through all the innumerable ways we can do that. So stay tuned and stay put or sit tight, I guess, as it were, for January when we will start that deep dive into our statement. And be sure to check out the statement on our website if you haven't already, so that you can see what you have to look forward to.
We'll see you in January.
Great. Thanks, Troya.